Okay, what are we going to do today? I told you a little bit last week. We're going to spend from now coming up till Christmas looking at the topic of Christmas. Yes, that's what we're going to do. But we're going to look at indications in the Old Testament that this Jesus would come. And a lot of people don't really know about the fact that in the Old Testament, the entire Old Testament is pointing forward to this one who's going to come. And if you just casually sat down one day and you read the Old Testament, not knowing anything, you'd catch a couple of things. One thing you'd catch is Israel is all over the place. Yes, because it's the narrative history of the nation of Israel. But you'd also notice that through almost every single book of the Old Testament, they keep mentioning something about this guy, this person, this larger-than-life being who's fully man, but yet has some kind of special divine connection. And he comes out all over the place, just all over the place, so that by the time you end the Old Testament, you ask yourself, well, I know who Israel is, it's a nation, but who is this guy who's coming out of Israel? That's Jesus. So the Old Testament points forward to Jesus coming. The New Testament documents Jesus actually coming, and then what the consequence of that was. So today, and for the next 3 weeks, we're going to look and see what the Old Testament says about the coming of this one. And could you, this is the question, could you, if you were smart enough, could you make a list of all the things you read in the Old Testament so that by the time Jesus came, you would say, there he is? So we're going to look at some of them. This is how we're going to organize it. This is the word that shows up many times. This is the Hebrew for Messiah. You read it, right to left. So it's Mashiach. Mashiach. Okay, got that? Never mind. You'll get it by the end. Mashiach. And so that shows up a lot. And by the way, the word really only means someone who is anointed. And when you say someone who's anointed in this election season, it's easier to understand. Donald Trump, for instance, has been anointed to be the next president, but he's not yet. Okay, not really anointed, but the idea is that he has the mantle of the job placed on him, but he has no power just yet. He will come into power. So anointed and Messiah means someone who has been given the authority to be in charge of everything, but there's a certain amount of it that's just a not yet, although he is indeed king. And that's Jesus. There is, if you look at the Old Testament, with David, remember David and Goliath? Oh, right? David and Goliath, when David was that age, I know I get criticized for my sound effects all the time, but when David was that age, when he was a boy, the prophet Samuel came to his household to look for the next king of Israel, who was going to replace King Saul, and he went through all the sons in his dad's household, and went from the top to the bottom, from the oldest to the youngest, finally went through all the boys that were in the household, and then the prophet asked the father of the household, is this everybody? Because none of these guys is it. And he says, well, there's this kid outside. He's my youngest. He's tending to the sheep. He's got the dirt job. So we could bring him in, but, and at that point, the whole family kind of scoffs. He comes in, and the Samuel the prophet says, he's the one. He's the one. And he puts his hands on him and uses some oil, and he anoints him king. Was he king yet? Not quite. So that's what the whole idea of Messiah is. One who has been pre-selected, preordained, but there is still something yet to come in terms of his rule, and that's Mashiach. So you read all through the Old Testament, you see that. So let's see how we're going to find this. If you're a rabbi and you're just reading through the Old Testament, I think that's Rabbi Hillel, actually, from before Jesus. Photograph, not really. Here's what we're going to do. What does the Messiah look like if we assemble the clues from the Old Testament? What does he look like? What should be all the characteristics so we can say that matches? Like, who here has played the game of Clue? Some. Did you know in England it's not called Clue, it's called Cluedo? Really? Yeah. Anyway, in Clue, you have to win the game, you remember what you have to do? You have to say who and where and with what. Remember that? So you've got like Miss Marple? No. Actually the names are, did you know that the names in the game are clued after the color of the pieces? Did you ever get that? Colonel Mustard is a yellow piece. Professor Plum, purple. Anyway, so it would be like Colonel Mustard in the, conservatory. I like conservatory with a lead pipe, right? So if you get all those three things, when you make the accusation, you win the game. Well, this is what we're doing in the Old Testament with the Messiah. Basically, where and who and what and when. Can we actually get an idea of who the Messiah is in history if we come down to the basic characteristics of the who, what, when, where, why? Is that in the Old Testament? So that's how we're going to do this. But we're just going to do these. We're going to do the who's and then the what. Who is he? What does he accomplish? When is he supposed to come? And where is he supposed to come? So in the who category, we're going to talk about what his appearance is, how he's treated, potentially what his ancestry is, and some unusual experiences that sum up to who he is. And that's what we're going to do today. We're going to do the who question today. Next week, we're going to do the what question and find out what he accomplishes. What is it the Messiah is going to accomplish? What are the offices he's going to hold potentially? What's his historical influence? It's really the impact of his life. What's his authority? What's his legacy? So we'll do that actually next week on December 11th. And then we'll talk about the when. Did you know the Old Testament talks about the when of the coming of the Messiah? It's remarkable. And when you see it, you're going to ask yourself, how did they not expect him coming? So we're going to look at the when, what century, what decade, what year, what day. Yes, what day. So that we're going to go through that. That'll be on December 18th. And then the easiest one to answer will be on December 25th, because guess what? Christmas is on Sunday. Where is he going to be? What continent, what nation, what region, what village? And that'll be December 25th. So with those categories right there, like in the game of Clue, you should be able to put together a pretty rational checklist of who the Messiah is, what he's going to accomplish, where he should show up, and when he should show up. And what are the earmarks about who he is? Woo! That's all in the Old Testament? Yes. And so I didn't want this to go over your head and forget all this, so that's why we handed out a second handout today. I hope everyone got one. If you didn't get today's, I'll make more for next week. Did anyone not get one that wants one? Because it's a long list. Okay, so I think we got them. That list, I'll give you one of those every week so you can keep, so you can understand. Now this is just the top of the heap of what the Old Testament says about the Messiah. There is much more, but these are probably the most prominent, so I don't want you to miss these. Okay, so let's do this. Today, we're going to start with the who question. Looking for, Jiddim. That's, my text didn't work out. That's Hebrew for Messiah right there. Okay, let's start here. Genesis 49:10, and in all these passages, I'll give you on the right or next to the verse, the approximate date that it was written down, that we get it, okay? So here we go, Genesis 49. Now in Genesis 49, there's only 50 chapters to Genesis. And at the end of Genesis, you see Jacob, whose name was changed to Israel, who was the father of the 12 sons, the 12 tribes of Israel. Jacob is going through the list of all of his sons, and he's giving them a blessing as he's on his deathbed. Basically, I'm leaving, boys. You have great families. One at a time, let's bring you up and let me say something about you. So he comes up one at a time and says something. When he gets to Judah, who's actually the fourth from the oldest. Yes, he's the fourth from the oldest. Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah. There we go. Okay, excellent. So he's the fourth oldest. This is what he says to Judah. The scepter will not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until he comes to whom it belongs, and the obedience of the nations is his. What? Well, that should make the sons of Jacob go what? Because there's king talk in here. Do you see the king talk? There's king, the scepter. A scepter shall not depart from Judah. When he's not just talking about Judah the son, he's talking about Judah and all of his ancestors, that come after him. So his descendants, his descendants. So somewhere in the family of Judah is one who will be king, and not just a king, a pretty big king, if you look at it. Because what does the last line say? The obedience of the nations, not just Israel. So someone's going to come down as a descendant of Judah's line who will actually be a king in charge of the nations. It's big. And it says the scepter shall not depart from Judah. You know what a scepter is, right? There's a scepter right there. See that long stick? That's a scepter, and kings even up until, Western civilization, they always had scepters. And if you had a scepter, it was usually a stick that had a thing on the top of it. Have you seen the crown jewels in London, by the way? Oh my gosh. If you want to see scepters with diamonds the size of eggs, no fooling. You got to go see the crown jewels. If you don't ever see anything else in London, you got to see the crown jewels. Just astonishing. But anyway, there are scepters there that were used by the king and queens of England, a long stick that has something really regal and very valuable on top of it. And as long as the king or the queen held that, they were in charge. That was a scepter. And when they died, the power was passed on to the next person by passing the scepter. So this authority stick is what I call it. Jacob is saying is going to be given to the son Judah, fourth from the oldest, and in his descendants there will be one who will indeed become the king of all the nations. And it's not going to fail. It's going to happen. That scepter will not depart. So this is a huge clue in the very first book of Genesis, that there's someone coming out of the line of Judah who will indeed have the rights, and it will not fail, has the rights to be king over the world. So not just a somebody, someone really special. Okay, the tribe of Judah, that's your first thing on your sheet there. He's going to come out of the tribe of Judah. So if someone happens to say, I'm the Messiah, and I come out of the tribe of Levi, you can say, I don't think so, because according to Jacob's prophecy and his blessing of his sons, it was going to come through Judah. Does Jesus come from Judah? Something we can check. Okay, let's move on and see. Psalm 132:11. Now this is written during the time of David. The Lord has sworn to David a truth from which he will not turn back. Of the fruit of your body I will set upon the throne. So, the throne, could it mean just the throne of Israel? It could, but the context tells us it's bigger than that. It's like the king over the whole world. So now we know it's got to be in the tribe of Judah, but even more specifically, is going to come from David. Of the fruit of your body, that means your descendants. The fruit of your body, your offspring, is going to come one who's like that. Wow. So, also Jeremiah 23:5. Jeremiah is a much later prophet during the time of the captivity. Behold, the days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will raise up for David a righteous branch. That's the descendants again. And he will reign as king and act wisely and do justice and righteousness in the land. So again, big king that comes out of David. Okay? So the second thing you can tell, and this shows up in so many places about David being connected, because David was a prototype. That's not even a good word to use, more a type, but a prototype. If you want to have an idea what the Messiah is going to be like, look at David, because David is a man after God's own heart. He ruled eventually. Now, he wasn't sinless like Jesus is, but he ruled thinking and wondering all the time what's best for the sheep that belong to God. How can I shepherd them? And David started out, was a boy, as a shepherd. He was pulled out of shepherding the sheep when Samuel anointed him king. So David always thought about what was good for Israel. Sometimes he didn't, and when he didn't, it all went bad. But he eventually came around, and God said, that man is a man after God's own heart. He's after my heart. That's what Messiah will be like. He'll be thinking and acting just like I would. Another clue, Psalm 2. Now, Psalm 2 is probably the most, uber messianic psalm in the entire Psalms. I mean, it's if someone says, gee, do you know any Psalms that talk about the Messiah? Psalm 2. It's huge. It's just gigantic. So Psalm 2, why are the nations in an uproar and the peoples devising a vain thing? The kings of the earth take their stand and the rulers take counsel together against the Lord, against Yahweh, and against, his anointed. Here's that special guy. Pops up again right here in 1000 BC with David. And his anointed. Now the whole rest of the psalm is about how the rulers of the world are going to be opposed to this anointed king. Remember, like David when he was a boy, he was anointed king, but he hadn't become king yet. Here you have the kings of the world, he's going to talk about in just a second, are really up in arms against this anointed king. This anointed king hasn't shown up yet, but they're just totally opposed to him. So see how it goes. It says, let us tear their fetters apart, cast away their cords from us. He who sits in the heavens laughs. Ho, 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 ho. The Lord scoffs at them. Then he will speak to them in his anger and terrify them in his fury, saying, but as for me, I have installed my king upon Zion, my holy mountain. I will surely tell the decree of the Lord. He said to me, you are my son. Today I have begotten you. Whoa, verse 8. Ask of me, and I will surely give the nations as your inheritance. The nations, not just Israel. Here's the super king again. Not just Israel, the nations as your inheritance, and the very ends of the earth as your possession. You shall break them with a rod of iron. You shall shatter them like earthenware. Well, I guess he's powerful. Now therefore, O kings, and this is his advice to the kings who are all wrinkled because of this one coming. Now therefore, O kings, look, show discernment. Take warning, O judges of the earth. Verse 11. Worship the Lord with reverence and rejoice with trembling. Do homage to the Son, that he not become angry and you perish in the way, for his wrath may soon be kindled. How blessed are all who take refuge in him. So this Messiah that's coming is powerful. And everyone will have to give account to this one powerful ruler who is ordained and anointed from God himself. And not just Israel is accountable to him, the earth is accountable. And everyone who thinks they're a big tough guy, powerful king in some little wherever in the rest of the world, they are accountable. Which is why in so many other passages, the Messiah is not only just called a king, he's called the King of Kings. He's a bigger king than all the kings. Imagine the most powerful king you can think of. Alexander the Great, some of the Caesars, all those guys. They're nothing. They're nothing. And so the writer of Psalm 2 says, you guys who think you own the world because you're so powerful, you need to kind of chill because there's a king of all the kings that's coming and you will be held accountable to him. Yeah.
Who wrote Psalm 2? Was that David?
I don't think we know who wrote Psalm 2. Maybe you can find out. I forget. There's I could look really quick. Sometimes it has an attribution at the beginning of it. Sometimes it doesn't. Let me just see if it has an attribution. If it does, we'll know, but I can't remember right offhand. It's a good question. Who wrote Psalm 2? Does it have an attribution at the beginning? Yeah, the reign of the Lord's anointed is all it says, so. We don't know. We don't know. But if you happen yourself to be a king over a very large region, you need to tremble. That's what Psalm 2 is saying. There is a king coming who has already been pre-anointed. He's preordained. He's been selected. And he's coming. And if you're smart, you'll take use of the time you got right now to recognize his authority. If you're not smart and you're all full of yourself and you like, just running people's countries and hurting people, look out. Because the King of all kings is coming. So this guy, this Messiah, isn't just like we run to say about Jesus the meek and mild. Well, in many senses, he was meek and mild in how he did his 3-year ministry. But this is not meek and mild. This is powerful authority, supreme authority over all the earth. Now, no one can have that kind of power unless the Creator himself somehow gives it to him, because this place is owned by the Creator. So here we start to get this picture of this super authority who speaks for God, who has his heart, who also will judge the earth, who everyone is accountable to, and yet he seems to be fully man in the way he's talked about, and yet specially connected with God in such a way that maybe he himself is God. Okay? So he's the king over all kings. Let's move on. Let's try these two. I love these verses. Isaiah wrote, again, during the captivity times, Isaiah 28, "Therefore thus says the Lord God, behold, I'm laying in Zion a stone, a tested stone, a costly cornerstone for the foundation, firmly placed. And he who believes in it will not be disturbed." And now let me read Psalm 118, because together they make a really nice message. "The stone which the builders rejected has become the chief cornerstone." Now this is an image that's used all the way through. In the ancient world, if you were going to build a building, right, you have to start somewhere. Well, for us, we start building a building by building a foundation, right? You don't build the walls and then try and pour a concrete slab. Doesn't work. But for them, what you did instead of a concrete slab is you put on the first stone that marks the corner of 2 walls. And from there you build all the building around that. So in a sense, wherever you place the cornerstone is where the building's going to be. And the integrity and structure of the building is built on where and how that cornerstone is placed. It also states an intention. If you come across a building site back then and you see a cornerstone in place, you know that coming soon is a building. So what he's saying both in the Isaiah and Psalm passages is that God himself is building a building. He's in the midst of building something. And the very first chief bit of it, around which everything will be oriented, the cornerstone, is a person. I'm laying in Zion a stone, and he who believes in him will not be disappointed. Now, we know that this is talking about a person because we know that God built the nation of Israel like a building in that sense. The metaphor was not lost on them. And then when you run to the New Testament, which I didn't have time to put up, in the New Testament, Paul mentions this all over again. there is a cornerstone that was laid. That cornerstone, the intention of building a building that's square and perfect, that cornerstone has already been laid. And that cornerstone is the Messiah, Jesus. So it states the intention from the beginning of the construction project of all eternity that this one would be the cornerstone for the whole thing. And yet, in the New Testament it says, like he mentions in Psalm right here, many people, when they're walking around the village and they see the stone, instead of anticipating a building, they're going to trip on it. Very interesting. Instead of finding the cornerstone, anticipating a work that's going to be done, and watching as God builds based on this cornerstone, instead the cornerstone itself, Jesus, will be a stone that they trip over instead. Two different things. So this is another one. Here's the passages if you want to go look them up. Did I include these in your sheet? Maybe, I hope. Maybe? Oh, rats. Okay, I'll write them down next week. Those are the places where that cornerstone image comes up in the New Testament. They kept making their case all the way through, and Jesus did too, expressly, that this cornerstone idea, this building that God's building, that's built around someone and built around someone in the corner, Jesus says that's me, and Paul says that's Jesus. That was laid ahead of time. God's building a building on that. If you neglect that cornerstone, you neglect the entire structure that's built after that, which is God's home for those of us who love him. So that's what he's saying. So he's the rejected foundation of Israel. So what's interesting, let me just go back. The stone which the builders rejected has become the chief cornerstone. So the nation of Israel, in a sense, was meant to be the masons that put together the stone building of the kingdom of God in a metaphorical sense. They were the ones who are supposed to build that. But it turns out, he says, the ones who are supposed to build that kingdom, starting with Israel and the rest of us, completely ignored the most important piece of it, the cornerstone itself. So that's just an important metaphor through all the Old Testament. So Jesus himself, this Messiah, is a cornerstone that will be rejected as the foundation of Israel. Before I go on past that, if you were a Jew and you heard that, you would be very offended. Because you would say, wait a second, God gave us the kingdom of God to build. We're the Jews in Israel. We're the ones that communicate to the world God's intention for the Creator to live with us in community. We're the model community, and we're telling you how that works. We'll tell you what's going on, and we would never, ever miss the cornerstone that God would provide for this structure we're supposed to build. We would never miss it. But they missed it. And that was predicted back in Isaiah. The cornerstone will be rejected. It'll be totally overlooked. So it is really it's a flying condemnation of Israel that the one you've been waiting to find, the one who's been mentioned so mysteriously through the entire Old Testament, when he comes, you'll miss him. And you'll go on building a building without him. See the metaphor? And that's exactly what the Jews did at the time of Jesus. They went on building the religious building of Judaism, leaving the cornerstone, Jesus, out of it. But God says, he's my cornerstone, and I'm building a building with him as the corner. See, so just got to see, it really predicts the blindness of Israel. Okay, Isaiah 7, picking up more clues from our clue board here. Therefore the Lord himself will give you a sign. Behold, a virgin will be with child and bear a son, and she will call his name Emmanuel. Wow. And Emmanuel means God with us. So a baby is going to be born, and this child will be called God with us. What? I know, it's crazy, but it's consistent with what we've been reading about this mysterious figure in the Old Testament, who is both simultaneously man and somehow specially connected to God with authority and power that only Creator can have. And there'll be a sign. He'll be born of a virgin. Now, there's been a lot of debate. A lot of critics look at this and say, yeah, that word for virgin doesn't really mean virgin. It just means young girl. It doesn't. Well, you could go around this circle many, many times. But indeed, when you get to the New Testament, and it's read and internalized in the New Testament documents, and they look at that and say it means a virgin. Mary herself, when Gabriel comes to her, remember that part of the Christmas story? And comes to her, and he says, you're going to have this baby, and the Holy Spirit's going to come upon you. And she says, well, how can this be? I've never been with a man. Virgin. So you can debate this verse all you want, but that word is used as much for virgin as it is young girl. But in certain you got to get the context straight. Now, would it be a sign to you if this one was born of a young girl? No. See, so you just don't go crazy places. It really is saying a virgin. So this one will be born of the virgin, will not have a human father. So here again, we've been putting together this picture of this on our clue board. This one who's coming is fully man and fully God. And the fully man part of him is even more interesting because the mystery kind of increases, because not only is this a fully human being, but they will not have a human father, but a human mother who's a virgin. Dun, dun, dun. Did that happen? Oh, yeah, it did, actually. Matthew. So, Matthew 1:23. So he will have a very unusual birth, and that unusual birth will be so unusual so that if you missed all the clues up to that point, you'll see that clue and say, oh, I read this, I read this, I read this. Isaiah, I read this. Virgin birth. This will be a sign to you. It's meant to be a deliberate indicator to you. That's why the whole virgin birth figures so prominently in the Christmas story, and in Matthew particularly. It's because it was a sign. God did this deliberately so that if you were sleeping, you'd get it. You'd get it. An unusual birth through a virgin. Okay, Zechariah 12, one of my favorite verses anywhere. Here we go, Zechariah 12:10. This is God speaking in the first person. I will pour out on the house of David and on the inhabitants of Jerusalem the spirit of grace and of supplication, so that they will look on me whom they have pierced. And they will mourn for him as one mourns for an only son, and they will weep bitterly over him like the bitter weeping over a firstborn. They will look on me whom they have pierced. What does that mean? It's not metaphorical. Someone who's been stabbed. And sure enough, when Jesus was crucified, remember how they tested to see if he was dead? They stabbed him. They will look upon me. Now, that's interesting. God is speaking in the first person, but God in the first person says they'll look on me whom they have pierced. And then he moves into death language. You see the mourning words? Death language. So are you telling me that this special one who is fully human and somehow divinely connected can die? Yes, and in fact, he will die. And he will be pierced. How can the most powerful being promised from the beginning of the universe be killed? Remember, all the kings are going to be subject to him. The king of all kings. Remember Psalm 2, king, 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 kings. You better watch out, better watch out. You better be nice to this guy, because if you're not, he's going to get you and he's going to trample you. How can someone like that be killed? Really? Come on. And that is the principal reason why most Jews don't believe Jesus is the Messiah. Because they say someone that powerful can't be killed. And yet, he is. Now, if he's powerful enough to keep anyone from killing him, then why would he be killed? How could he come under the power of someone else and against his will be killed? Well, actually, it's impossible, which means he voluntarily allowed himself to be killed. And we see that also in the New Testament talks about it. We see that in Isaiah 52 and 53, what I read this morning. He voluntarily took on the sins of the world, voluntarily died. Even as Jesus was coming close to the cross and he's with his apostles, he said, this is why I was born. I was born for this death. This is part of the picture. This is what it's all about. Death talk about this one. Psalm 16. For you will not abandon my soul to Sheol, that's like hell, nor will you allow your Holy One to undergo decay. Death talk. More death talk. And now this special one, this man-God hybrid Messiah, another clue. He's now here called the Holy One. That's a very peculiar word for him. Holy means sinless. Someone who's so completely separated from this world that no sin contaminates him. He's not defective like we are. He's sinless. But this Holy One who will die really interesting. He won't abandon his soul to Sheol, which means he's not going to go to hell and be stuck there. But more importantly, he's not going to decay. Now, when's the last time you saw someone die who didn't decay? It just doesn't happen. That's the way of life and death. You die. Yeah, right? Yeah, you die and you rot, just to be kind of plain about it. But this one will die, but fully die, but he won't be abandoned to hell, and he won't decay like everyone else does. Well, how can someone fully die and not undergo decay? unless they come back to life. So really, it's prefiguring the whole resurrection. So if you ever run up against a Jew who says that Jesus can't be the one, you can say, well, yeah, he died. There's lots of death language about the Messiah. But by the way, it's good news and bad news. The good news is he comes back to life. He resurrects. And this is why Paul, when he says, if you don't believe that Jesus raised from the dead, you're the most to be pitied. Because if he didn't raise from the dead, he's not the Messiah, based on the Old Testament. He's a fake. And many other things he gets at there. So here's this guy, death without decay. So the Messiah himself will indeed die, rather than going into an eternal reign. He will die, but then he won't have decay, which means the effects of death won't touch him. He'll die, but the effects of death won't touch him. Wow. Now that's a special guy. Now if you've been reading through the Old Testament trying to get clues about this Messiah, this one should knock you off your chair. Not only did I not expect him to die, I didn't expect that death would have no hold on him. That's like crazy talk. That sounds like resurrection. By the way, you could make a case if you were a scientist that this means the Messiah will live in the 20th century where we have embalming fluids and you just pump his veins full of embalming fluids and he won't decay. So the Messiah's got to come in the 20th century. And no. That's not it. However, if you ever go to Moscow and you go to Red Square, you can see Lenin. When Lenin died, they decided to put him on display. He is still on display in Red Square. You can look through a window and see his body. They embalmed him. I got to tell you, the effects of death are evident. He's a dead guy. He just has embalming fluids in him. So I haven't seen him myself. Has anyone seen that? I've seen pictures of it. And when I see pictures of Lenin in there, he's behind glass. You can go, he's right in the wall of Red Square. And I've seen pictures and go, man, he's just dead. So anyway, let's move on. 5 more clues. Isaiah 53, I read from it this morning. Who's believed our message? Who's believed this? And to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? Arm of the Lord is the power of what he plans to do. For he, the mysterious Messiah, he grew up before him like a tender shoot and like a root out of parched ground. It means he actually started as a baby. That's the tender shoot. He started as a young one. He didn't come on the scene fully grown. He started as a tender shoot. How can the Messiah, the fully God man, start as a baby? Are you kidding me? No. No, he's got to march on the scene out of obscurity as a fully formed man who's got all the power and might, and he's going to do his stuff. He would come on the scene as a guy. Who would send the Messiah as a baby? Tender shoot. But, interesting. And like a root out of parched ground, he has no stately form. He's not a handsome guy, or majesty that we should look upon him, nor appearance that we should be attracted to him. As opposed to one of the most famous kings of Israel, the first king of Israel, Saul, was picked because he was pretty good looking, just like me. Never mind. He was also tall, just like me. So they said, we need a king, we need a king, we need a king. Hey, he looks like a king right there. And he was hiding behind baggage at the time. You have to go read it. It's really pretty funny. So, but in this particular case, it's going against the standard form. There's nothing about him that would make you say he should be king because he's just not going to have the attractiveness. He was despised and forsaken of men, a man of sorrows, acquainted with grief, and like one from whom men hide their face, he was despised and we did not esteem him. There was nothing natural about his appearance that you would run to him and put him on your shoulders and say, let's make this one king, as opposed to Saul. And then when you get to the crucifixion, when you get to the beatings and you get to the whippings and all that happened to them, people would turn aside because they just couldn't watch. I mean, he was not esteemed in that sense. If you ever watched Mel Gibson's movie about Christ, what was it called? Passion of Christ. Something you almost can't watch, It was very realistic. And so when I watched that movie the first time, I remembered this phrase. I thought, boy, you got that right, Isaiah. I can't watch this. Despised. Yeah, we didn't esteem him. We didn't hold him in high esteem. We didn't think he was anybody. We didn't think he was a nobody. We did not esteem him. 7, he was oppressed. He was afflicted. True. Yet he did not open his mouth. He wasn't making excuses. Like a lamb that is led to slaughter and like a sheep that is silent before its shearers, so he did not open his mouth. By oppression and judgment he was taken away. And as for his generation, who considered that he was cut off out of the land of the living for the transgression of my people, to whom the stroke was due. Now that phrase I underlined, cut off out of the land of the living. That's a euphemism for dying. When you're cut off from the land of the living, you're killed. It's actually, it's a killing. It's not a natural death. Someone deliberately cuts you off from the land of the living. If you die in your deathbed, you're not being cut off from the land of the living. Someone cuts you off from the land. So this means you'll be killed. Again, it's the strange paradox. The all-powerful King of Kings will allow himself to be killed and to be cut off from the land of the living and to die. It's astonishing. And why? For the transgression of my people. Oh, what? So now we start to open up the picture for the purpose of the voluntary death. Remember I said if he's all powerful, there's no way in which anyone can overpower him and kill him. The only way he can be killed is if he allows it voluntarily. Well, why would someone voluntarily allow their own death? Is there a purpose behind that? Yes, there is. What is it? Something about the transgression of the people itself. And we already read in Isaiah earlier this morning that indeed that's the case. Our iniquities, our transgressions were placed on him, and he died. And he allowed himself to be killed with our transgressions on him. So you really get the gospel story opening up in Isaiah already before he's even come 5 centuries later. This one will come all-powerful, Son of God, divinely connected, who has a power over all humanity, and he will allow himself to be killed in order to take on our sins. Before John 3:16, there's Isaiah. So let's move on. He goes on. He says in this strange death, his grave was assigned with wicked men, yet he was with a rich man in his death. Yeah, that ring any bells? Yeah, that's definitely the case. Rich man in his death because he had done no violence, nor was there any deceit in his mouth. A guy who's never lied. A guy who's never lied. Wow. But the Lord was pleased to crush him, putting him to grief. If he would render himself as a guilt offering, a replacement offering for our sins, he will see his offspring, he will prolong his days, and the good pleasure of the Lord will prosper in his hand. Now here's another, if you're reading the Old Testament for clues of the Messiah, this has got to blow your mind. God is going to voluntarily allow him to be killed, and it pleases God for that to happen. What? It's pain and suffering. Yes, but the benefit, and no one's debating that, but the benefit to mankind is extraordinary. And so for that reason, God is pleased to do this. What? If indeed God can bring the greatest good to mankind through that kind of pain and suffering, don't you ever believe that the good he's going to do through you may not cause pain and suffering. Just saying. But the good is so great because of that. And that's what he says right here. He'll see his offspring. There will be offspring to this one who dies. How can someone who dies have offspring? Well, spiritually speaking, we're all sons of God because of what he did on the cross. We're his offspring. So his offspring will continue. He'll prolong his days. How can he prolong his days when you die? When you die, you're dead. Not if you're raised. You see the conundrum you get to when you read this? He's going to die, and it's going to be excruciating death, and yet his days are going to be prolonged. They're going to go past that. Resurrection. And the good pleasure of the Lord will prosper in his hand. Wow, man. It wasn't an accident. Therefore, this is God speaking, I will allot him a portion with the great, and he will divide the booty with the strong. That means he'll be the victor. He'll be the victor in all these conquests. Because, why? He poured out himself to death and was numbered with the transgressors. He poured out himself to death. That's a great voluntary line. He poured himself out. He said, I'm going to do this. I'm going to deliberately lose my life, pour myself out. And he's going to be mistaken to be a transgressor himself. See that last line? Was numbered with the transgressors. That is, people walking around will look at robber, must be a robber in the middle, that Jesus guy, he'll be numbered with the transgressors. Everyone will think that he's done something wrong. Why is he being crucified if he didn't do something wrong? He must have done something wrong. So Jesus himself is a transgressor. He'll be numbered with the transgressors. And in fact, a lot of the taunts he gets when we read this in the crucifixion are taunts that come back to, come on, if you're really the Son of God, if you're better than all the rest of us, if you're better than me, Well, then get off the cross and save all of us. And then, let's throw out the Romans while you're at it. That's not there, but that's the idea. If you really are something super special, then do something super special. Otherwise, you're just like these other two robbers next to you, numbered with the transgressors. How can the sinless Son of God, who's never lied, who's never sinned, who the testimony of his entire life tells about the fact that he's something much more special than that, how can he be numbered with the transgressors? Because in the end, because he was crucified, everyone would say he must have deserved it. He must have deserved it. But he didn't. But he was willing to voluntarily go through this, knowing that that's what people would think. Now you see, have you ever been wrongly accused? What's your very first fleshly reaction when you're wrongly accused? You defend yourself. You defend yourself. No way. Linda says no way. Right on, Linda. Right on. But it's a natural tendency. It's really a natural tendency to say, no, I didn't do that. You've got it all wrong. Let me tell you how good I really am, right? That's what you want to make the case for. Let me tell you all the great and good things I do, not just to off-balance that bad one, but that one bad one I've never done because that's not like me. This is what I'm like. I'm good. Now, if anyone in the entire history of humankind could actually defend himself well, it would be Jesus. But we're told here in another part of Isaiah, he was silent. He didn't defend himself. He would be accused of being a sinner like everyone else, and yet he's the only perfect man, sinless man who's ever walked, and he didn't mouth back to them. He didn't defend himself. But he could have. In fact, he could have done a lot more than just talk back to him. He could have said, oh, Son of God, you don't think I'm the Son of God? Watch this. Kawamo! And death and destruction would come from heaven. He could have made very clear to the skeptics who he was while he was on the cross. But like he said to his apostles, but this is what I came for. I'm going to do this. I have to see this through. This is why I'm here. This death is purposeful. It's not accidental. It's not accidental. And in a strange irony, the real power of God, even though it wasn't exhibited in retribution at the time of the cross, the real power and grace of God was exhibited through that voluntary death than through any act of power he could have done to exonerate himself. It's really astonishing. I think that's why when you see people at the cross, I'm thinking specifically of the centurion that's there, he watches Jesus die. Remember what he says? Surely this was the Son of God. What did he see? He saw someone who died like no one else had ever died before. And if Jesus had gone on a tirade, trying to quote to him all the places in the Old Testament that were fulfilled in him, which Jesus will do it after his resurrection with the guys going to Emmaus, if he had made a case for himself on the cross saying, yes, I'm the Son of God, yes, I'm the Messiah, yes, I'm the one who is the cornerstone at the beginning of all creation, yes, I'm the guy, I don't think that centurion would have come to God. But he watched how God voluntarily died. There must be purpose, and that purpose must be to our benefit. So he got it. He got it. Numbered with the transgressors. So it was an unjust but purposeful death. The death of the Messiah is not an accident, and it's not a mistaken identity, like we got the wrong guy because he died. It's actually purposeful. So when you see the Messiah come up, you should see him come and die, real death, for a real purpose. And that might be central to why he even exists. That's what you would expect. Let's go on. And some of the last voices before his arrival were right at the end of the Old Testament. Here we are at 425 BC. Malachi, or as some of you call him, Malachi. Don't call him Malachi. Malachi. Malachi, another minor prophet at the end of the book, 4 centuries before Jesus. Behold, I'm going to send my messenger. So Malachi is speaking in the first person as God speaking. I'm going to send my messenger, and he will clear the way before me. I'm going to send my messenger, and he'll clear the way before me. And now we got two guys in play right here, the messenger and God speaking in the first person. And the Lord whom you seek will suddenly come to his temple, and the messenger of the covenant in whom you delight, behold, he is coming, says the Lord of hosts. So now we know in our building our clues about the Messiah that when he comes, some special messengers come in before him. Some guy who somehow clears the way and makes a path for him. And in fact, this is talked about so many other places in Psalms and in Isaiah about this special guy who would come and pave the way for him. When you sing Handel's Messiah, you talk about the hills remaining low and the valleys come up. Remember that? That's about paving a highway. And when you walk, if you walk someplace, you're aware of where there's hills and there's valleys. Well, the whole metaphor was, if you want to make a way for someone like a king to come, well, then you get rid of the valleys, you get rid of the hills, and you pave a highway, is what you do. And that's what's talked about this special messenger. He's going to come and pave a highway so that this one can come right in. He's going to go before him to do that. The mountains will be made low, and the valleys will be brought up. That's what he's talking about. We do this to this very day, by the way. When you build a highway from here to wherever, and you have to go through mountains, you figure out the best way to chart the road so that when you have to dig out a little bit of mountain, you can take that much earth in the mountain and push it down in the valley part and you get a flat. That's why they actually do cut into hillsides when they pave. You would think, why are they cutting into the hillside? They need to make enough dirt to fill in the lower part below it. And so you put the road based on where the dirt you take off from the top will fill it. It's actually literally having the mountains being brought low and the valleys being filled up. We do that to this very day. Metaphorically, before this great one who is both divine and man, someone will come to prepare his way. What? Yes. Who was that? John the Baptist. John the Baptist. And the New Testament says he's that guy. He's that guy who came to prepare the way. A special messenger. By the way, what did he do that prepared the way for the Messiah? You ever thought about that? What did he do? Really? Really? Well, I challenge you to look into this. Look at the life of John the Baptist, see what he does, and see why it is that what he did paved the way so that Jesus' message would get traction. John the Baptist did something very specific. Well, he baptized people. Yeah, I know, but let me get deeper on that. So that's your assignment if you're wondering. He is that special messenger, but why would the divine God-man, Jesus the Messiah, why would he even need someone to come and prepare the way? After all, he seems to be very capable, right? He's the creator. Why would you need someone to come before him? Not because the Messiah is incapable, but because the people weren't hearing right yet. You know how we say many times, if you want to talk to someone about salvation, you need to first make a case for why salvation is necessary. You need to make a case for why we are in a state that needs saving. So many times when I've talked to people about Jesus and about salvation and being saved by him, the first thought is, well, I don't need saving from anything. Saved from what? I mean, so anyway, that's largely, if you look at John the Baptist, somehow he's going to make that case so when Jesus comes on the scene, they should get it. They should also be able to get it because back here in Malachi, I almost said Malachi, back in Malachi, we know that a special messenger is going to come. And no one at the time of Jesus, including the Pharisees, denied the fact that John the Baptist was not indeed an incredibly special messenger. Even the Pharisees recognized they got this somehow. They really did get it. And later on, Jesus will use the same argument about that. So John, his ministry, was it from God, Jesus would say? Well, he knew that the Pharisees would answer yes, because they saw John and thought, yeah, this guy is something special. He is a special messenger. Well, they couldn't say that. You'll find that in one of the Gospels where they have this debate. John was recognized as being some kind of very special forerunner, some very special messenger. And even those who were not faithful to God saw it. They saw it. So here's one of those clues that should come by as if you're watching for the Messiah to come. You'd say, well, a special messenger is supposed to come. Have we had one of those in the last couple of years? Have we? That guy down at the river who eats grasshoppers. He's definitely from God. I wonder if the Messiah is near. That's the connection they should have made. Because up until John the Baptist, there wasn't any special grasshopper eater that was in Israel. He came and really made an impact. He really made an impact. He's a big deal. So, and grasshoppers taste pretty good. I've had some. Okay, Zechariah 9:9. Whoa, this is incredible. Rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion. Shout in triumph, O daughter of Jerusalem. Behold, your king is coming to you. Clue time. He's just and endowed with salvation, humble and mounted on a donkey, even on a colt, the foal of a donkey. So the Jews knew that when the king, the Messiah was coming, he would come on a donkey, and a young donkey, right? And he's bringing to you salvation. John the Baptist already made the case for why you need salvation. When your king comes, he will save you. But you'll be able to spot him. Here's the deal. No one will ever mistake this. When you see him, he'll come on a little donkey. So wait for that day. Did that day happen? Yes. And it was orchestrated by Jesus to be in full view of everyone in Jerusalem. If you ever go to Israel, and you get your geography straight, you realize that just east of Jerusalem, the east end of Jerusalem, the walled city of Jerusalem, is where the temple was. And as you looked out from the temple on the east side of the city, and you looked further east, you'd look across the Kidron Valley, and then you'd see the Mount of Olives, which is a ridge that runs north-south, just right next to the old city, right? You get this when you go, you see this. So when Jesus comes into town in this huge Palm Sunday, this procession, he doesn't decide to come from the north or the west or the south. He comes from the east. And he comes over the Mount of Olives, that hill, and the trail that goes down into the eastern entry into the city comes right down broadside the Mount of Olives. And so as he comes down, everyone in the temple could look out and say, who the heck is that? Because there was a huge crowd of people. It was the biggest proclamation he could ever make. It's not that far away, really. It's relatively close. So close that you could look over there and you could see not only a crowd of people, but you'd see a guy riding a donkey, a little donkey. Easily, without question. You don't need any binoculars. You just see it clearly. They would not miss the point. If someone came into town, while there's millions of people in town, this is Passover that's happening, millions of people outside are in town, they're all staring across at this huge procession that's right across the little Kidron Valley, and here's hundreds of, maybe thousands of people all around this guy coming down this, and it's in full view of you, and he's on a donkey, and everyone knows what that means. He is proclaiming himself to be the king. He is proclaiming, without question. Just without question. And remember when the Pharisees are with him as he's coming down the hillside, and people are saying, they're quoting out of the Old Testament, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord, right? And so here's this guy, they're using messianic attributions for him. And the Pharisees, when Jesus gets close enough on this donkey, they don't tell him to get off the donkey. They tell him, you need to calm down your people. Because they're kind of going way over the top here. They're less like, come on, you can't call you the Messiah, the king. This is just crazy. I don't know why they didn't say get off the donkey, but they said, can you just calm your people down? And remember Jesus' response? Classic. Right. If I tell them to shut up, I'm sorry, but the stones will start saying the same thing. This is inevitable. They have to proclaim my coming in. I'm the king. I'm the one that the prophet Zechariah said would come in on a small young donkey, and look what I'm doing. So Jesus did not deny it as he had that confrontation, even before he gets into town. And as he comes into town, people are following him. They have the palm branches. They're proclaiming him Messiah. They are crowning him king of Israel that day when he comes in. And you got to believe the Pharisees were really, really, really fearful, because the crowd support was so strong that if Jesus instructed them to, he could have fomented a coup that day. He had enough people. They could have thrown out the Pharisees. They could have marched Jesus into the temple. They could have made him king. That could have been the day. The Pharisees are scared now that we've got 1 million people in town. What happens during this Passover celebration, if indeed this Jesus, who starts the week coming in on a donkey, proclaiming himself to be king without any ambiguity, what happens if through the next 4 or 5 days until we get the Passover celebration, what happens if he turns the hearts of all the 1 million people in Jerusalem? The Pharisees would say, we're toast. And if it goes on the rest of this week like it happened on that first day when he came down from the hillside, we're goners. And so throughout Passover week, you can read the second half of John is all about that week. Through Passover week, all they could do was plot to figure out how to get him out, because he was a direct threat to their authority. What got Jesus killed on the cross? What were the geopolitical events that had it happen? Because he claimed without ambiguity to be the king. And those in power said, not on our watch, you're not. So they killed him. And yet, Psalm 2, he is the king of all kings. And if you happen to be a king right now in charge of something, you do well to take note of the Son, because someday he'll judge. Well, let's wrap this up. So he does have this unusual arrival. There'll be an advanced messenger. That was John the Baptist. He'll come on a donkey. That's deliberate. So here's the summary, and see if you've been taking notes well. He'll come from the tribe of Judah. He'll be a descendant of David. He'll be the king over all the kings, ultimate authority. He'll be rejected as the foundation of Israel and the foundation of the larger building, which is the building that houses those who follow God, his people. He'll have a virgin birth, unusual. He'll have death, he'll be dead, but he will not suffer decay, an unusual death that doesn't follow on to the outcome of death. He will have a purposeful and necessary death, and it will be unjust. Also, this unusual messenger will precede him, who will talk about him, clearly John the Baptist, and his kingly arrival will be announced without ambiguity on a donkey colt. That's what he's going to do. So I can't remember where I go here. Okay, I'll talk about that in a second. Go back. So here's the deal. If you looked at that and you just finished your quick summary survey of the Old Testament and said, I'm making notes about who this Messiah is supposed to be, and you look at that list, if it's not Jesus, it's got to be someone who looks just like Jesus. I mean, there's just no way around it. There's no way around it. And this, plus the other things we'll talk about in the next 3 weeks, the other items that kind of pinpoint who and when and how and all that kind of stuff, the odds of someone accidentally being born at the right time, in the right place, out of the right ancestor and all that kind of stuff, and doing all the things he did, is so impossibly small. John, what's the number? It's one chance in 10 to the 17th. Now that's a 1 with 17 zeros after it. It's a very large number. And to illustrate that number, some people have calculated, if you take silver dollars, and tell me if I'm wrong here, John, you just read this. If you take silver dollars and cover the state of Texas with silver dollars, and one of those silver dollars is painted red, let's say, and you're gonna randomly go in, and you're gonna reach in and pull a silver dollar out of the state of Texas, and it's that red one. Well, you don't just cover the state of Texas. You cover it to a depth of what, 2.5 feet? 2 inches. Okay, 2 feet 2 inches. We got the numbers are in now. Numbers are in. So that many silver dollars covering the state of Texas, 2 feet 2 inches deep. One of them is painted red. The chances of you accidentally reaching in and getting that red one is as much as getting one of those silver dollars. That's the chances that if someone accidentally was born and fulfilled these prophecies. It's that huge. So if it's not Jesus, it's got to be someone who's remarkably like him, because he fits to a T so far. So next week, we'll look at some more clues. We're going to look in the Old Testament to understand what the Messiah will accomplish. What will he do? Can we pinpoint him based on what he accomplishes? So look over these passages. I did put that on your sheet. So just briefly look at those before we get to next week. And we'll see what it is we should expect him to do once he gets here. Now, we look today to find out where he came from and some other earmarks about him. But if he is indeed this God-man, this Messiah, then he's going to do something that should shake up the world. The world. It's the world. So let's find out what that is, and let's see if Jesus did that. And if that's true, then we can just add more silver dollars to cover Texas and say there's some more you just can't accidentally do. Okay? We're going to sing this song. I forgot to tell you, Marie, that's the last song. So let me pray as they come up and get set, and we will marvel at the King of Kings and Lord of Lords, who did indeed come 2,000 years ago, and it was predicted for centuries. So let's pray. Father in heaven, we thank you indeed for these great words of yours. We are stunned by the precision of so many voices in the Old Testament talking about this mysterious one who is both God and both man, who comes purposefully to accomplish your will. And amazingly, that chief purpose, the first visit, is to die on our behalf. So God, I pray that as this Christmas season goes on, that we would continue to marvel that this Jesus isn't one who just accidentally fits the bill. He's the one that's been planned for since the beginning of the universe. And in the historical narrative, without question, he came and fulfilled these. So again, shake our hearts, awaken our sleepiness, give us an understanding of the deliberateness of your love for us, your patience in your love for us, that through the death of Christ himself, you might bring us to yourself and we might have communion with you. An astonishing plan unfolds that continues to astonish the world, and that's Christmas. So thank you for these great words now in Jesus' name. Amen.
Not stand and sing.